Of all the kitchen innovations throughout the last century, one trick above all others remains criminally overlooked. And I don't mean some viral hack from a home renovation influencer who wants you to buy matching acrylic bins from Amazon. I'm not talking about lazy Susans or pull-out drawer organizers or those little tiered can racks you see at the Container Store. No, no, no. I'm talking about something far more fundamental than any of that. Something that was standard practice in millions of American homes during the 1920s and 1930s. Something so effective, so elegantly simple, so bordering on obvious in hindsight, that it essentially doubled your usable kitchen storage without adding a single square foot of floor space. And then, for reasons that have everything to do with money and almost nothing to do with common sense, modern builders just stopped doing it, buried it, pretended it never existed, which, when you actually sit down and think about it, is kind of insane. So what is this magical Depression-era pantry trick? It's called between studs shelving, recessed wall storage, whatever you want to call it. The concept is almost embarrassingly straightforward. You take the dead space inside your walls, that 3.5-inch cavity between the wooden studs that is just sitting there doing absolutely nothing productive, and you turn it into shallow, flush-mounted shelving. That's it. That's the whole trick. You cut a rectangle into the drywall or plaster, frame it out, add a few horizontal shelves, and suddenly you've got a built-in storage niche that holds cans, spices, jars, bottles, oils, whatever you need. And it doesn't steal a single inch of floor space because it's literally inside the wall you already have, the wall that was just standing there being a wall, doing wall things, contributing nothing to your organizational life. Now I know what you're thinking. 3.5 inches deep? That's barely anything. What can you even fit in there? And honestly, that skepticism is exactly why this technique is so criminally underappreciated. Because here's what most people don't realize. 3.5 inches is actually the perfect depth for about 80% of the things you store in a pantry. A standard can of soup, 3 inches in diameter. A jar of pasta sauce, roughly 3 inches. Spice containers, condiment bottles, boxes of tea, packets of seasoning, hot sauce bottles, olive oil, vinegar, soy sauce. All of them fit comfortably in a 3.5-inch recess. You're not trying to cram a Costco-sized bag of rice in there. You're organizing the small and medium stuff that normally gets lost behind the big stuff in your regular deep cabinets. And believe me, that stuff absolutely does get lost. And that right there is the real genius of this whole approach. It's not just about creating more space. It's about creating the right kind of space. Shallow space. Visible space. The kind of space where nothing hides behind anything else. Ever. Let me put it this way. Think about your pantry right now. Go ahead, picture it. Really picture it. You've got shelves that are probably 12 to 14 inches deep, maybe even deeper if you've got those big builder-grade cabinets. And what's happening on those shelves? I'll tell you what's happening because it's happening in every kitchen in America. The front 3 or 4 inches are full of things you can see and use regularly. The back 9 inches? That's a graveyard. Expired canned goods. Mystery spices from 2019. That jar of tahini you bought because you were going to make homemade hummus, and then you made it once, and it was fine, but not as good as the store-bought stuff. So now the tahini just sits there judging you. We've all been there. Don't pretend you haven't. Research on household food waste suggests the average American family throws away something like $400 worth of food every single year. And a huge chunk of that waste, a really staggering percentage, comes from one simple problem that nobody wants to admit. You can't see what you have. End items migrate to the back of deep shelves and essentially disappear from your mental inventory. You buy duplicates because the original is hiding behind a box of pasta, and then one day you clean out the pantry and discover you own 4 bottles of Worcestershire sauce. 4. No household needs 4 bottles of Worcestershire sauce. But deep shelves don't care about your needs. Deep shelves have their own agenda. The Depression-era solution was elegant in its simplicity. Don't make the shelves deep and hope for the best. Make them shallow and guarantee visibility. Every single item, one row deep, all of it visible at a glance. Nothing hiding behind anything. Your pantry becomes less like a cluttered closet and more like a well-organized pharmacy shelf. You can see every can, every jar, every box. And when you can see everything, you stop buying duplicates. You stop forgetting what you have. You use what you've got before it expires. During the Great Depression, that wasn't just smart organization. It was survival. When every nickel counted and every calorie mattered, you couldn't afford to let a can of beans go bad because it got pushed behind a bag of flour 6 months ago. But here's where things get really interesting. Because the Between Studs pantry wasn't some isolated folk invention dreamed up by one clever farmer's wife in Nebraska. It was part of a much larger revolution in kitchen design that swept through America and Europe during the 1920s and 1930s. A revolution driven by an unlikely combination of industrial efficiency science, feminist ideals, and sheer economic desperation. And the story of that revolution involves some of the most fascinating and underappreciated innovators in architectural history. Let's rewind to 1898. A furniture company called Sellers, based in Elwood, Indiana, created what would become arguably the single most important piece of kitchen furniture in American history. They called it a kitchen cabinet. The world would come to know it as the Hoosier cabinet, named after the state where nearly every manufacturer of these things was located. Now, as most of you probably know, the term Hoosier just means someone from Indiana. There are several theories about where the word actually comes from, one involving people yelling, "Who's there?" across rivers. Another involving a man who lost his ear in a bar fight, and someone asking, "Whose ear?" I'm not entirely sure which story is true, to be honest. Probably neither. But I digress. Before I get into why the Hoosier matters so much, you need to understand what kitchens looked like before it came along, because they were, to put it mildly, an absolute disaster. Your typical late 19th century kitchen had a work table, a sink, maybe a few open shelves, and a storage cupboard, if you were lucky. That was it. Dry goods were kept in a separate pantry room, which was really just a closet with some shelves if you were being generous about it. Canned goods and jars lined up on whatever surface was available. There was no counter space to speak of, no built-in cabinetry, no organizational system whatsoever. And the women who worked in these kitchens, because let's be direct about who was doing virtually all of this labor, were walking thousands of steps a day just to prepare 3 meals. And I do mean thousands. A government study commissioned by the U.S. Department of Commerce in 1920 measured the average daily step count in a kitchen at approximately 2,000 steps. 2,000 steps, just in the kitchen, just cooking. The Hoosier cabinet changed everything. And I don't use that phrase lightly. This single freestanding piece of furniture combined storage, workspace, and specialized tools into one ingeniously compact unit. We're talking built-in flour sifters that let you sift directly into your mixing bowl without dirtying a separate tool. Ant-proof glass spice jars with labeled tops. Because pest control was a genuine daily concern in kitchens of this era. Pull-out cutting boards that gave you prep space and then tucked away when you were done. Dedicated sugar and salt bins engineered to prevent spills and keep moisture out. Integrated recipe book holders with a flip-up shelf so you could follow a recipe hands-free. Bread boxes with ventilation slats to keep loaves fresh. Tin-lined drawers that protected dry goods from insects and humidity. And about 40 inches of actual usable counter space. 40 inches. Which was basically an unimaginable luxury in a 1920s working-class kitchen where most women had maybe 12 inches of flat surface next to the sink if they were fortunate. This wasn't just furniture, this was a command center. A workstation designed with the precision of an industrial engineer who happened to care deeply about making someone's daily labor less miserable. By 1920, the Hoosier Manufacturing Company alone had sold 2 million units. 2 million! And they were just one of over 120 companies making these cabinets. At its peak, roughly 1 in 10 American homes had a Hoosier cabinet in the kitchen. And that's a conservative estimate that only counts the one brand. There were over 300 different models produced by Kopp's Napanee alone. And get this. That Department of Commerce study found that the Hoosier cabinet saved a person over 1,500 steps per day in the kitchen. 1,500 steps out of 2,000. That's a 75% reduction in kitchen walking from one piece of furniture. I mean, come on. That's not just good design. That's a genuine feat of engineering. That's poetry in the absence of motion. But the Hoosier's real legacy isn't the cabinet itself, beautiful and clever as it was. It's the philosophy behind it. The idea that kitchen storage should be shallow, organized, visible, and within arm's reach. Everything you need, right where you need it, nothing buried, nothing hidden. This is the exact same principle that drove the Between Studs Pantry, the shallow shelf walk-in pantry, and essentially every worthwhile storage innovation that emerged from this era. The core insight was simple, but genuinely revolutionary. Depth is the enemy of organization. The deeper the shelf, the more stuff disappears. The shallower the shelf, the more you can see. And what you can see, you actually use. Now, while all of this was happening in Indiana, something equally remarkable and arguably even more ambitious was unfolding across the Atlantic Ocean. In 1926, an Austrian architect named Margaret Schutte-Lihotzky was commissioned to design standardized kitchens for a massive public housing project in Frankfurt, Germany. The city had a catastrophic housing shortage after the First World War and was building thousands of new apartments under the direction of chief city architect Ernst May. Schutte-Lihotzky, one of Austria's very first female architects, was brought in specifically to solve the kitchen problem, and the solution she created, the Frankfurt Kitchen, remains one of the most influential pieces of domestic architecture ever designed. There's one in the permanent collection at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It's the earliest work by a female architect in MoMA's entire collection, and it absolutely deserves to be there. Here's what makes Schutte-Lihotzky's approach so fascinating. She didn't design this kitchen as a homemaker. She designed it as an engineer. She conducted detailed time-motion studies of women working in their kitchens, literally tracking their movements across the floor like an offensive coordinator, diagramming football plays. Little lines mapping every step, every reach, every turn, every wasted motion. And then she systematically eliminated them, one by one, until she arrived at a layout so efficient it bordered on the obsessive. The result was a kitchen that compressed an entire domestic workflow into just 6.5 square meters, about 70 square feet, the size of a generous bathroom. And yet it contained absolutely everything a cook needed, arranged with surgical precision. The sink, stove, and workspace formed a tight triangle that minimized walking. Labeled aluminum drawers lined the walls for flour, sugar, rice, and other staples. And here's a detail I genuinely love. The drawer fronts were painted blue because contemporary research had discovered that flies avoided blue-colored surfaces. She used oak wood for the flour containers because oak naturally repelled mealworms. Beech wood for the countertops because beech resisted staining, scratching, and acids. The seating was a revolving stool mounted on casters for maximum flexibility. Every single element was designed to minimize wasted motion and maximize visible, shallow, accessible storage. Roughly 10,000 Frankfurt kitchens were installed in public housing units between 1926 and 1930. It was, remarkably, the world's first mass-produced fitted kitchen, and while many users struggled with its rigid layout, its insistence that they use each bin only for its labeled purpose, and the fact that it was simply too small for two people to work in simultaneously, The design fundamentally transformed how the world thought about kitchen architecture. It became the template for the modern fitted kitchen that every single one of us uses today. I want you to let that sink in for a moment. Every built-in kitchen cabinet you've ever opened, every integrated countertop you've ever chopped vegetables on, every fitted kitchen in every apartment and house anywhere in the developed world. All of it traces its lineage back to this tiny 70-square-foot kitchen designed by a woman who, in her own words, had never actually cooked a meal when she conceived the design. You'll be surprised that before I conceived the Frankfurt Kitchen in 1926, I never cooked myself, she recalled, on her 100th birthday in 1998. I designed the kitchen as an architect, not as a housewife. Yeah, you heard that right, her 100th birthday. She lived to be 103 years old. During World War II, her career was interrupted by 4 years in prison for her active participation in the anti-Nazi resistance movement. She was arrested in Istanbul and transported back to Austria to face trial. And yet she survived, and she kept working, and she kept designing. And she lived long enough to see her tiny 70-square-foot kitchen end up in the permanent collection at the Museum of Modern Art, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and half a dozen other institutions around the world. Extraordinary woman, truly extraordinary. But that's perhaps a story for another day. So by the late 1920s and early 1930s, you had this incredible convergence of ideas from both sides of the Atlantic. The Hoosier cabinet's philosophy of everything within reach. Shuta Lihotzky's scientific approach to motion efficiency. Christine Frederick's adaptation of factory floor tailorist principles to the home kitchen. Catherine Beecher, who had imagined this kind of rationalized kitchen decades earlier, inspired by the compact galley kitchens on ships. It's all of these threads weaving together into a golden age of kitchen innovation. And at the heart of every single one of these approaches was this deceptively simple concept. Depression-era families seized on this with serious enthusiasm. They built recessed niches behind pantry doors, along kitchen walls, in hallways, even in dining rooms. If you've ever explored old craftsman bungalows or Sears catalog homes from this period, you've probably seen them without even realizing what you were looking at. They sometimes look like boarded-up windows at first glance. But look closer and you'll see the telltale signs. Trim work that doesn't match the original millwork, a slightly different plaster texture, shelves that sit perfectly flush with the wall plane. Open up the walls during a renovation, and you'll find the ghosts of these shelves everywhere, sometimes still intact behind layers of drywall added in the 50s and 60s, sometimes with faded pencil marks, where someone carefully measured out the spacing for their canned goods. I've read accounts from renovation crews who have found sealed-up niches with Depression-era preserves still sitting on the shelves, glass jars with handwritten labels, completely forgotten for 70 or 80 years, sealed behind drywall like little time capsules of domestic ingenuity. The really clever homeowners took the concept further still. They'd run between stud shelving floor to ceiling on an entire wall, creating a full-height, one-can-deep pantry surface. Now picture this. Floor-to-ceiling shelving that sits completely flush with the wall. From across the room, it just looks like a wall with a lot of narrow shelves on it. But that wall holds 200 cans, 50 jars, and 30 bottles of various condiments. Lace all organized, all visible, all accessible, without moving anything else out of the way. And it protrudes 0 inches into the room. 0. Some especially resourceful homeowners did this on both sides of an interior wall. Kitchen side gets canned goods and cooking staples. Dining room side gets serving dishes, glassware, or more food storage. Same wall, pulling double duty. Not a single square inch of floor space sacrificed on either side. Combine that with a proper rack mounted on the back of the pantry door itself, and a modest kitchen closet with maybe 15 square feet of floor space could hold an absolutely staggering volume of food. more in many cases than a modern walk-in pantry 3 times its size, all because every single item was 1 layer deep and visible at a glance. So why did it vanish? The answer is a perfect storm of economics, building codes, and architectural fashion that conspired over decades to bury one of the most practical innovations in domestic history. And honestly, each reason on its own would have been enough to do serious damage. Together, they were lethal. Let's start with the economics, because that's where the story really turns tragic. After World War II, America experienced the largest housing boom in human history. The scale of it is almost hard to comprehend today. Millions of returning soldiers needed homes immediately, yesterday. The GI Bill provided mortgage financing on terms that had never existed before, essentially zero down payment for veterans. And developers, most famously William Levitt of Levittown fame, looked at this tsunami of demand and figured out how to mass-produce houses the way Henry Ford had mass-produced Model Ts 3 decades earlier. The parallels to Ford were intentional, by the way. Levitt studied Ford's assembly line methods obsessively and adapted them for home construction. Levittown on Long Island built over 17,000 homes between 1947 and 1951. At peak production, Levitt's construction crews were completing 30 houses per day. 30 houses per day. I want you to sit with that number for a second. 30 families went from having no home to having a brand new Cape Cod with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen in a single day. It was a marvel of logistics and standardization, and it completely changed what Americans expected a house to be. But here's the thing about building 30 houses a day. At that speed, every single unnecessary step in the construction process was ruthlessly, mercilessly eliminated. The houses were built by specialized crews who each performed one task and moved on. One crew poured foundations, another framed walls, another did roofing. There was no room for improvisation, no tolerance for custom work, no patience for anything that couldn't be replicated identically 17,000 times. And custom carpentry, like between-stud shelving, that was one of the very first casualties. Building a proper recessed niche required measuring the stud spacing in each specific wall, cutting a precise rectangular opening with clean edges, framing the niche with horizontal blocking between the studs, installing individual shelves at carefully spaced intervals, and then finishing all the edges with trim work so it looked intentional rather than like someone had hacked a hole in the wall. That's maybe an hour of skilled carpenter time per niche, give or take. Multiply that by the 6 or 8 niches a well-equipped Depression-era kitchen might have used, and you're looking at a full day of additional skilled labor. In a construction system where entire houses were being erected in 16 man-hours total, an extra day of finished carpentry wasn't just inconvenient, it was economically unthinkable. It was a luxury that the production schedule simply could not accommodate. And so it was cut. Building codes evolved too, and not in ways that were friendly to the technique. Modern energy efficiency standards require that exterior walls be densely packed with insulation. Fiberglass bats, spray foam, blown-in cellulose. The whole cavity gets filled. You simply cannot carve shelving into an exterior wall anymore without creating a massive thermal bridge, a cold spot where heat leaks straight through the wall and your energy bill goes through the roof. So right away you've lost half your walls as candidates, and interior walls, which were always the prime real estate for between-stud storage, started filling up with other infrastructure as homes got more complex. Electrical wiring running between floors, plumbing lines serving upstairs bathrooms, low-voltage cable for televisions and internet, HVAC ductwork in certain construction styles. The modern wall cavity is busier than it has ever been in the history of residential construction, and building inspectors, understandably, are not exactly enthusiastic when homeowners start cutting rectangular holes into structural assemblies without a clear understanding of what's running through them. One bad cut through a live electrical wire, and your clever storage project becomes a house fire. So there are legitimate safety considerations here that didn't exist in 1932. But the biggest killer of all, the one that really drove the final nail into the coffin, was architectural fashion. And this is where the story gets genuinely ironic. Starting in the 1950s and accelerating through every subsequent decade, American kitchen design fell deeply, irrevocably, in love with the open concept floor plan. Walls between kitchens and living rooms came down. Walls between kitchens and dining rooms came down. Walls between everything and everything came down. Architects and developers discovered that removing walls made spaces feel bigger, more modern, more luminous, and buyers ate it up. The trend reached fever pitch in the 2000s and 2010s, fueled in no small part by home renovation television shows where every episode seemed to end with someone swinging a sledgehammer into a wall while shouting about sightlines and flow. By the time the open concept craze peaked, it had become practically impossible to sell a house without the words "open floor plan" in the listing. Great for entertaining, the agent said. Great for keeping an eye on the kids. Great for natural light and spaciousness. And those things are true enough. But you know what an open floor plan is catastrophic for? Walls. And you know what you need for between stud storage? Walls. Actual physical walls with studs in them. The architectural trend that was supposed to modernize the American kitchen systematically demolished one of the most effective storage solutions those kitchens ever had. We knocked down the walls and then wondered why we didn't have enough storage. It's like demolishing a bridge and complaining you can't cross the river. Meanwhile, the kitchen cabinet industry was absolutely thriving and loving every minute of this transformation. Manufacturers figured out that they could sell homeowners enormous quantities of deep cabinetry at prices that would have made a Depression-era carpenter faint. The industry standardized on 24 inches deep for base cabinets. 24 inches. Think about that measurement for a second in practical terms. And that means the back 12 inches of every single shelf in your kitchen is essentially a black hole where food products go to be forgotten, expire quietly, and eventually get thrown away during your annual guilt-driven pantry cleanout. But 24-inch cabinets look substantial. They photograph beautifully for real estate listings and kitchen renovation magazines. They fill the kitchen with this comforting visual illusion of abundance and capacity and competence. And the markup on them is spectacular. A full set of kitchen cabinets in a modern home renovation can easily run you $10,000 to $30,000, and high-end custom cabinetry can blow well past $50,000 without breaking a sweat. Between stud shelving, by contrast, costs maybe $40 in dimensional lumber and a Saturday afternoon with a drywall saw. I'll let you guess which solution the home building and renovation industry has a massive financial incentive to promote, and which one they'd prefer you never learn about. But here's where I need to pump the brakes on my own rant for a second. Because I want to be fair. I'm not suggesting we should rip out every modern cabinet and regress to 1932 like some kind of kitchen Luddite. That would be absurd. Modern cabinetry has genuine, meaningful advantages that our grandparents and great-grandparents would have given their eye teeth for. Soft close drawer mechanisms are a small, daily miracle. Pull-out trash can enclosures are genuinely civilized. Under-cabinet LED lighting transforms meal prep from squinting and guessing to actually seeing what you're doing. Drawer-mounted spice organizers are clever. Lazy Susans in corner cabinets, while imperfect, are better than the black hole of inaccessibility that corner cabinets would otherwise be. The modern kitchen has come a long way, and a lot of that progress is real, tangible, and worth preserving. I'm the last person who wants to romanticize the Great Depression as some golden age of home design. People were suffering. Let's not pretend otherwise. But the between studs principle hasn't gotten less valid with time. If anything, and I cannot stress this enough, the modern kitchen needs this technique more desperately than kitchens have needed it at any point since the 1930s. And here's why. The average new American home has grown considerably over the decades, from roughly 1,000 square feet in the 1950s to well over 2,000 today. But kitchen storage hasn't remotely kept pace with the explosion in what we're actually trying to store. The modern household stocks more distinct food products than at any point in human culinary history. We've got specialty olive oils from 3 different regions of Italy, artisanal vinegars, 17 different varieties of hot sauce, because apparently we've collectively decided that one hot sauce is not enough. Fermented foods we'd never heard of 10 years ago. The sheer diversity of products we're trying to organize has absolutely exploded, and our storage solutions, those trusty 24-inch deep cabinet shelves, haven't evolved 1 inch to match. They were designed for an era when your pantry contained flour, sugar, salt, some canned vegetables, a bag of rice, and maybe a tin of coffee. Not 47 different condiments sourced from 4 different continents. In 2005, the National Association of Home Builders conducted a nationwide survey asking home buyers what single feature they wanted most in new construction. The results were fascinating, and if you've been paying attention to this story, deeply predictable. The number 1 answer, ahead of energy-efficient windows, ahead of master suite bathrooms, ahead of home offices and 3-car garages and every other amenity the building industry was pushing, was a walk-in pantry. The single most requested feature in American home construction was more kitchen storage, and not just any storage, visible, accessible, walk-in storage where you could see everything at a glance without playing archaeological expedition through layers of forgotten groceries. Home buyers in 2005 were essentially describing, without knowing it, the exact storage philosophy that Depression-era homemakers had perfected 75 years earlier. Maximum visibility, minimum depth, everything at a glance, nothing hiding behind anything. Sound familiar? It should. Because that is precisely what the Depression-era approach was optimized for. The shallow shelf walk-in pantry, the between studs niche, the Hoosier cabinet with its 1-item deep racks and labeled jars. All of it was solving the exact same problem that 21st century homebuyers were still begging builders to address 3/4 of a century later. History absolutely has a sense of humor, and this particular joke, I have to say, is almost too on the nose. What makes it even more absurd is that the home renovation world has sort of rediscovered the between studs technique over the last few years, but they treat it like some kind of revolutionary life hack that just fell from the sky. You see articles and TikToks and Instagram reels with breathless titles like "Genius Hidden Storage Idea Your Contractor Doesn't Know About" and "This Secret Wall Trick Will Transform Your Kitchen Forever." Secret? Your contractor doesn't know about it? Are you kidding me? Your great-grandmother knew about it. Her mother knew about it. She probably built 6 of these niches herself during the Depression using scrap lumber salvaged from a broken fence and a handsaw she borrowed from the family 3 houses down. The only people who actually forgot were the production developers who were too busy speed-building subdivisions to include anything that required more than 30 seconds of thought per room. I think the larger lesson here goes beyond pantries. We assume newer means better, and in many important ways, modern homes genuinely are superior, better insulated, better wired, structurally safer. But we also lost things that worked remarkably well. The walk-in pantry in mid-century homes, the broom closet, the linen closet in the hallway, the telephone niche that would make a perfect charging station today, built-in ironing board cabinets. We lost all of these not because they stopped working, but because mass production housing made them inconvenient to include. Maybe that's the real story. Not that we forgot a clever trick, but that an entire building philosophy that prioritized function, efficiency, and daily livability got replaced by one that prioritizes appearances, speed, and profit margins. The Hoosier saved 1,500 steps a day. The Frankfurt Kitchen compressed an entire cooking workflow into 70 square feet. Between stud shelving turned dead wall space into organized, visible storage that cost almost nothing to build. All of these innovations came from an era when waste was unacceptable, when every inch genuinely mattered, when the people designing kitchens understood something fundamental that we've somehow managed to collectively forget. The best storage isn't the deepest storage. It's the storage where you can see everything you own without moving a single thing out of the way. And look, the good news is that the technique hasn't expired. It hasn't been made obsolete by technology or rendered illegal by building codes. It works in any wood frame home with interior walls, which describes the vast majority of houses in North America. You need a stud finder, about $20. A drywall saw, about $10. Some 1x4 lumber for blocking and shelves, a level, some sandpaper, maybe a can of paint to match the wall, and basic carpentry skills that any reasonably handy person can pick up from a YouTube tutorial in 20 minutes. The total materials cost is less than a decent dinner out, and the result is permanent. Built-in storage that will serve the next 3 owners of your home long after every trendy clear container pantry system you've ever purchased has ended up in a landfill. You can install them in the pantry closet itself, turning a cramped space into a storage powerhouse. Along the kitchen wall between the kitchen and an adjacent room. In the hallway, next to the refrigerator. Behind the pantry door. Anywhere you've got an interior, non-load-bearing wall with standard 2x4 framing. You've got 3.5 inches of untapped storage potential sitting behind the drywall, doing nothing, waiting for someone with a saw and a Saturday to set it free. Your great-grandmother knew this. She built it into her walls with her own hands. And if you've got an interior wall, a drywall saw, and a free Saturday afternoon, there is absolutely nothing stopping you from doing exactly the same thing. The trick never stopped working. Shallow still beats deep for visibility. 1 item deep still beats 3 items deep for accessibility. The walls of your house are still full of empty cavities between the studs. The solution was right there the entire time, hiding in plain sight. Or more accurately, hiding about 1/2 inch behind the drywall. All you ever had to do was look.